What's also interesting is we picked up this topic, which of course is sometimes a lot of people say has been driven to death to some degree. So naturally, there's going to be a whole lot of um opinions and point of view. In today's conversation, I think I'll keep my workload a little bit lighter, and that's largely because I have the benefit of having Diya with me, who's done a lot of work around diversity. And so let me just start with the a flip question to say we keep hearing that diversity drives innovation. But given the work that you're doing and what you're seeing really on the ground, Diya, what do you think is broken in the organizations, when it comes to this thing in terms of putting it to practice?
Mm. Rahul, thank you for asking that question. I think it kind of goes right to the passion that I have for the work that I do, which is that, like you said, the statement diversity drives innovation is probably, it's so intuitive. I mean, I think it needs no explanation to all of us. It would make sense that if you were to get a diverse group of people into a team or into a room or into any conversation, it should lead to innovative ideas, it should lead to diverse thinking, and therefore it should lead to innovative outcomes. And when we use the word diversity, the way I think about it is not, restricting it to just only personality or only gender, but really truly diversity in every shape and form. So people with diverse ideas, diverse experiences, diverse skill sets, and hence the natural ability to think differently. Unfortunately, when you look at what's been happening in organizations, over the last 20 years, particularly, a lot of money was pumped into this whole DEI space and bringing in diverse talent into organizations and creating diverse talent pools. But if you look at what it led to in terms of diversity of outcome and hence innovation being a very crucial one of those outcomes, unfortunately, it didn't seem to add up. So there was a lot of investment and input going in, but the output was not commensurate with that investment. And that's really what's in many ways led to a backlash on, diversity and investments in DEI. And we're seeing a rollback of a lot of those investments around the world, which to professionals like us who really believe that there is truth in, the statement that diversity drives innovation is very disheartening, because there was a lot of good work happening, which is now getting rolled back for paucity of focus, paucity of funds. But I think, to answer the heart of your question, why has this happened is because I think, unfortunately, we interpreted diversity to equal a quota system. And what we started to do in organizations is to tick the box in terms of bringing in certain ratios of what we thought was diverse talent. So it could have been an organization saying, oh, we're going to bring in 50% women, right? Or it could be an organization saying we're going to bring in at least 25% of a certain ethnic group. So we started to equate diversity with visible signs of diversity, which is gender, which is, ethnicity, things that are more obvious to track, that are more visible. And then we created this quota system of saying, if we've brought in X percentage of people into the organization, we tick the box. And the metrics all got associated around hiring only. So diversity of hiring, according to these metrics that were set. We even went so far as to incentivize people for hiring diverse talent. And senior executives had their executive compensation tied to DEI metrics, which were essentially hiring metrics. And so it became this whole self-reinforcing system. What ended up happening in that process is that I think in a lot of organizations, unfortunately, A, merit got compromised because you were chasing the numbers. And B, you actually didn't necessarily end up bringing in diversity of experience and thinking. So if I was to, put a group of people who come from very similar educational or, experience backgrounds and say, oh, we've got men and women, but we all come from very similar, let's say, large cities with similar educational backgrounds, is that going to be true diversity of thinking? Maybe, but maybe not. So when we say diversity breeds in innovation or spawns innovation, it really needs to be diversity in its truest sense, which is to say, am I really bringing in people who think differently and who have had a diverse set of experiences and therefore are going to speak from those experiences? So that's one part of it. And I think that's what's broken, is the overemphasis on hiring quotas and metrics. The other is that I can bring in a whole bunch of diverse people into an organization, into a team. But if I don't create a culture and an environment which is inclusive and which allows people to be themselves and speak honestly and share their experiences and opinions without fear of failure or worry of how they will be judged, then I bring in the diverse talent, but I kind of beat them into shape. So I bring in square, triangular, and circular pieces, but then I knock them into fitting square into square peg, and round into round, and then it defeats the purpose. So I think the two pieces that are unfortunately broken in many organizations are, one, that diversity has been reduced to hiring quotas alone, and two, that diversity has been focused on without focusing on inclusion and building a culture of inclusion. And unless the two go hand in hand, we're not going to see innovation as a result of it. So, I mean, just, that's really my sort of first piece. And I'm sure we'll explore it and unpack it.
Yeah. And leads me to think, I remember, so a couple of things, and maybe no particular order. When you talked about how a lot of things have been pulled back. Unfortunately, today everything has become so quarterly numbered, so much result oriented. Example of South African cricket, when they were trying to develop, inclusion. That's a sport example that comes to me. And the frustration that was evident because they had to fit quotas, right? There was a lot of that going on. And they persisted with it until it started to turn around, because things also need to take time. You will go wrong before you get it right, and because in the beginning you don't even know what you're doing. You operate from simple things, and when you're talking about inclusion, we're talking about diversity. Look at what's happening in the world. People brought people in without creating ground for inclusion. All of this anti-immigration thing and all represents that at a bigger level. So that definitely. And the other part is that you may be ethnically different, but psychographically where are you?
Yeah.
So which is a good example that you pick, that of course it's got to fit. The truth of the matter is that he refines the entire definition of diversity and goes off. Remember, this conversation for us is for fellow practitioners like us who are sitting in the room. At the end of it, we want to arrive at what do we do to turn the knob a little. Now, so I think maybe you've partly covered it, but I'm curious that beyond just plain representation, then if you were to actually focus at how does diversity ensure that innovation takes place inside an organization? And like you said, we started with saying that seems to be the most obvious, but in reality, how does it happen?
So I think, there are two parts to this. One is, of course, like we said, bringing in diverse talent. And when we say diversity, of course, bringing in people who actually have the capability and the experiences to bring diverse ideas and diverse thinking to the table. The other is, do you create a conducive environment where they're actually able to do that and thrive in that, in that system? And that then starts to talk to aspects like psychological safety, which you very beautifully delved into in the last conversation with Anjani. Are you creating a psychologically safe space where people can actually express themselves, even if they have a different point of view? So the system has thought a certain way all these years. My boss thinks a certain way. I have a completely diametrically opposite view. Do I actually feel comfortable to voice it? Or do I feel like I'm going to be called out for it or going to, be made to feel uncomfortable about it? So that's one. The other is putting in place systems and processes which will actually leverage the diversity of thinking that we are hiring, let's say, or nurturing in an organization. So when I say that, imagine a team that's working on a specific strategic objective of an organization or a project that has a deliverable within a certain milestone and time frame. Now, what tends to happen is that as human beings, we gravitate towards people similar to ourselves. That's a natural thing that happens. And so when we form teams, we tend to form teams with people who are like us because that makes us comfortable. And an organization has to very systemically, very consciously go against that natural grain and say, because I believe that diversity of thinking is going to drive innovative ideas and outcomes, I'm actually going to form a team that has individuals who are vastly different from each other. So I need to consciously, first of all, understand the individuals, because to know whether they're vastly different, I need to have ensured that I have a high degree of awareness of their strengths, their natural preferences, even their challenges and gap areas. And I then need to bring them together in a team where I've got 6 individuals who are very different from each other. What sits at the base of that is the fact that they then have complementary strengths, because you've got 1 plus 1 plus 1, 6 people who potentially have the power of many more strengths than if you had 6 people who were very similar to each other. So you need to consciously create a team like that. But that alone is not enough. So you've brought in the diverse talent, you've formed teams where you've got different people, complementary strengths. Again, the natural tendency often of human beings is, when we are with people who are different from each other, from ourselves, what results very often is conflict. Because I have a point of view, I'm a strong individual, I'm capable, I've had success behind me, so have you. And so when we have views that clash, there is likely to be conflict. So the organization then also needs to have systems, processes, and the culture where conflict leads to positive outcomes rather than degenerating and becoming dysfunctional. So these 3 ingredients, I think, bringing in and having the diverse talent, combining them in ways that are complementary, and then having the systems and processes and the culture in place, which is actually going to allow for dissent and diversity to lead to positive debate, to lead to conflict that has positive outcomes and doesn't become dysfunctional. These 3 things need to be in place. Only then will this diversity is equal to innovation or lead to innovation actually sort of play out the way we intended to.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. I mean, it's so easy and reassuring to gravitate towards homogeneity that you said, but all that largely produces clones and cliques, right? And we also talk about it that left alone, lack of conflict also means stagnation.
Absolutely.
So a friend of mine was once saying, she said, look at that couple, they never have a fight. What kind of partnership is that? Because what have you built?
Yeah.
But then I think unmanaged conflict, again, like you said, is chaos. Managed conflict is growth.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and that brings the team dynamics in, how we move to collaboration. Yep, well said.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, if I can, Rahul, turn it around, if I have the privilege of asking you a question, because you do a lot of work in this space, and when I was talking about putting complementary teams together, I think that goes to the heart of understanding people. And one of the things that I've seen in organizations that I advise and work with is that often, when we're forming teams or we're even just hiring into, functions or organizations, there's not that much thought that goes into combining people who are different. So we have a role, we have a JD, we look at skills and we look at qualifications, but we don't really look at personality. And often when we are saying combine different people, we want people who think differently, whose natural preferences are different, who gravitate towards different, kinds of outcomes, because that's what really brings true diverse thinking and, diverse ways of working. So let me turn the question around and ask you to, from your experience, talk a little bit about how diversity of personality plays into innovation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you touched on very early, at the very ingredient assembling stage, if you start to get that diverse group together, but what falls short is again personality at play. Our biases tend to gravitate us again to the like-minded. It's so easy to kind of see the differences so highlighted and the similarities so comforting that there is willy-nilly a clonization. We joke about the fact that if you let a sales guy hire accountants, he'll reject everybody for being boring, So I mean, because it just kind of plays out like that. But that's a fairly sort of a serious comment there, because it's very, very important that people need to understand and be objective and be very mindful that going into a meeting, they may be looking at a CV, but they're looking at a personality trait. So what have I seen in terms of personality trait? I mean, if you look at innovation itself, is a step-by-step process, right? I mean, we think of innovation, we tend to we start to think that it is just outright creative idea. It's not quite always like that. There are compositions of, various things that are taking place, and they all have a different texture. You're going to have innovation, for example, then sure, it starts at an idea, but you need to qualify the idea. You have to refine it for the risk.
Yeah.
right? You have to refine it evaluate it, whether it's like really feasible. Is the idea, no matter how brilliant, has the time come? Do we have the capacity? And then when we sort of launch it, it may not always execute the way it is. When is the time that you cut your losses, or when's the time that you kind of start to pivot around?
Yeah.
And all of these things tend to require a different kind of a skill set.
Mm.
And which is where the diversity comes. I mean, so oversimplified to say that just because if you're rating high on the big picture creative side, you must be an innovation champion. Not really. Let me tell you something. I'm so connected to the art world, both as a collector and having now exhibited. Some of the contemporary artists who are actually in current world successful in terms of fame and fortune, their works don't necessarily have the soul. But what they do have is strong element of execution, tremendous marketing, tremendous knowledge of product. I mean, I think many times though, when I sit with them and talk to those people, they would have been successful in any business. They would have been as rich selling scrap metal, I think, because they get the fact that there are multiple things creating it. So if I was to break it down and maybe using Lumina language a little bit, and Carl Jung's archetypes, if we talk the broad four archetypes, and when I talk about the color, those of you who are familiar with Lumina will know the colors, but those who are not, it's not that hard. I mean, when we think of the color yellow, which is sort of, the sunflower sun, the brilliant colors creating the optimism, hope kind of thing, maybe they are the ones who are doing the ideation, the out of the box thinking, etc. So maybe that's where the source of the ideas is. Not necessarily always, but primarily that might be one part where ideas are getting generated. But then you do need somebody quite the opposite, the auditor who comes in, punctures those unnecessary bubbles, and brings some ground reality, which ideas really have merit. Because a lot of these yellow people don't really wait to put legs under the ideas. They just keep like tossing them up in the air. But the blues won't let it pass without being seen. There is substantial evidence for it to work. And they also at that point are doing risk mitigation for the organization. Then come the reds, the red energy, the driving energy, who are the ones who are going to take it to execution. And then when you're going to do project evaluation, you need to have some sober, sensible, calm minds coming with the spirit of collaboration, willing to hold each other accountable with the collective goal. And that's when your green energy comes in. And then based on what you learn, you either continue or then you pivot and it's back to the yellow and looking at the ideas afresh, etc. Actually, I've got a couple of slides and I think Sonam, when I was talking earlier, the whole idea of that research, Sonam, of what was it called, the Scott Page research, right? Would you just put that in the group? People ahead, they might enjoy it, which basically says that diversity across the archetypes, meaning if you are covering all the ground, it increases the cognitive range of the overall team.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, I've actually seen that play out very beautifully in teams that I work with, and I've used Lumina with, some of the executive teams that I coach and work with. And what you're saying is absolutely right. We very often think innovation basically needs lots of yellows in the team, but that's not it. That's oversimplistic. What we actually need is a great combination of all four archetypes, because that's what actually leads to true innovation, and not just creativity of thinking, but innovation that's useful for the organization.
Well said. Innovation that is organizationally like beneficial. So it might not even be product. It might be form. It might be the process. It might just be packaging. It might be price. So what are the innovative ways of doing that? Now, for those of you familiar with this, and if you're not, don't let it shock you. It's Lumina. Lumina was designed to be high school read, like conceptualization. You look at that mandala in between, right? For those of you who've done MBTI, this is your Jungian setup. The extrovert, introvert is familiar to you. Big picture is your N, opposite down to earth is the S. Then you've got the T in the outcome focus, the F in the people focus, and the J and P, the inspiration and discipline. There you go. It's that same Jung model. So Lumina, because Lumina has big five research, but it also maps to Jung. So for those who are not familiar with Lumina, this is work. So if you look at these 8 aspects, right? Diya, I mean, I'm now gone beyond the 4-color archetype. You can also break down what is happening in a team, right? So if you look at the innovation model in Lumina, is you keep your options open is where it begins with the inspiration driven. Inspiration drivens are like operating from this adaptable, flexible mindset. So everything can be opportunity. That's also a bit dangerous. But the big picture thinking is when they start to see phenomena taking place in nature, and then they try to experiment with those ideas. Once an idea starts to make sense, kicks in the extroverted type, who will socialize and the idea, start to get some pick up ideas, start to build popularity, advocate the case, etc. And once it starts to take shape, once there is buy-in interaction, you want to start moving into action quickly. So our outcome focused, the result leader type of people. So the extroverted social leaders will hand it over to the outcome result leaders, who will hand it over to the process leaders of the discipline driven, who being purposeful will break the idea now down into a goal measured by structure and then delivered on deadline by the reliable. So these words that I'm using, you can see them, they're all written over there. They are part of the personality qualities. But essentially, the discipline-driven type are constantly iterating, right? They're just taking tracking. And the down to earth next are the ones where the auditors are taking place. They are foolproofing things. They are being pragmatic. They are bringing realism. Uh, what are the introverts doing? They are your reflective lot. They are the ones who calmly, patiently are taking input and turning it into something to use. And it's the people focused, right? Who are bringing that energy to the group to keep it together. And then the cycle goes on in a way. So hopefully that wasn't too complex. I mean, like, the language is easy. So all of us, have a few high scores and lack a few. I mean, I think it'll be too crazy to have all high scores. I think that'll lead us to medication potentially. But you got definitely all of us have some high scores firing. And what I want to say to you, you're always bringing a gift to a team. It's very easy to kind of self-reject if you don't have some popular scores. But no, we are bringing a gift to the team. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a layout from the personality perspective. Each of us is bringing some contribution to the team from the personality part of it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for indulging me with this. And now that we talked a little bit about personality, Diya, and this is, Lumina and is a shared love for you and I. But going beyond personality, I'm sure there are other things that we can talk about. So you and I were talking a little bit about, where maybe, you know, innovation comes into the picture more easily than others. And we talked maybe there are certain products and certain industries that maybe are not amenable. And I'm going to jump back to my favorite hobby also of personality to say that at the back there's always personality. But I can't help but talk about this on a lighter note. One of my favorite characters out of the old series called Seinfeld. There was a guy, George, and he's sort of on one of his first dates is like, very knowledgeably impressing his date to say that, look, the toilet paper has never been innovated. It is what it was. It'll always be like that. And then, of course, then later on, then Jerry Seinfeld and, Elaine bust him up to say, hey, what are you talking about? Like, texture has changed, packaging has changed, colors have changed. He said, okay, what do you want, a museum? My point to say is that even the flattest of products keep changing. And we picked up the example of how companies, even in the most traditional areas, can make a spin. We were talking about Marico that made Parachute, which was a coconut oil making company, discovered that that model is not working. You worked in HEO, so you've known the famous coconut oil story. But the point is, the company entirely pivoted to just being a marketing company, Marico, because they figured that they're not making money over there.
Yeah.
So Diya, I mean, like for me, I feel that whether it's organizations making mistaking, diversity for demographic representation, right? Um, that's one of the things that I think definitely from an organizational point tends to stand out. But when it comes to leaders, I feel the leaders' biases, to lean into their own preferred archetypes, unknowingly. Leaders stress under, the stress-based responses. I think a lot of the things that also inhibit innovation. So for me, yeah, I mean, these are some of the things that I was just doing as random thoughts. Having said all of that, I wanted to ask you, then what are the conditions that actually enable uh, organizations to leverage diversity so there is true innovation on the ground?
Yeah. So, something that you just said, I want to pick up from there and then build off of that. So one, very often we tend to think innovation is equal to product innovation. I mean, that's the most obvious kind of innovation that we understand. And I really like, there is a lady that I work extensively with called Dr. Linda Hill, who is from Harvard Business School and does extensive research and work in the intersection between leadership, innovation, and strategy. And she has a very simple definition of innovation, which I love because I think it just breaks down and simplifies the whole thing tremendously, which is anything that is novel and useful is innovation. Okay. Now, novel means it needs to be a new idea, something that hasn't been done or thought of before, but it's not enough for it to be novel. So a creative idea could be very novel, but like you said, is it ahead of its times? Is there a market for it? Is it pragmatically possible? Do we have the capability for it? That's the useful part of it. So that, those are the two things that it needs to satisfy in order to qualify as an innovative idea or an innovative solution. Now, when you think of it like that, it doesn't really then restrict only to products, right? So a way of thinking, a way of doing work in an organization, a way of go to market, a new distribution channel, an innovation in manufacturing process. I mean, all of those are innovations. It isn't just about products. And the minute you define innovation like that, you also then start to say, we actually need people to be innovative in all parts of the organization, not just in marketing or not just in research or not just in product innovation or product teams. So you need HR folks to be innovative. You need manufacturing folks to be innovative. You need sales folks to be innovative. And that then raises this question of saying, if we want to breed innovation as a way of doing, as a way of being, as part of the DNA in the organization across the board, how are we going to do that, and what's going to actually unleash that, right? And that's the question really that you're asking. To me, I think there are three enablers or building blocks that are needed. And the first one is what you just talked about, which is the leadership in the organization. I think it all begins there. So if you were to look at, the leader, which is, let's say, the CEO of the organization, or if it's one function or department, the head of that department or function, or you look at the leadership team as a whole, that's the first place where we need to bring in a difference if we've got to unleash innovation in the rest of the organization. And I think that's the real pivot that organizations are going through and need to go through, which is for leaders to transition from thinking of themselves as the ones who will steer the organization into the future, to actually start thinking of themselves as enablers. So in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even as far as, a decade back, leaders believed that they needed to have all the answers, and they needed to be the ones who would come up with the best ideas and really know what needs to be done in order to take the organization into the future. And I think it did two things. One is it would put tremendous pressure on the leaders themselves. Those of us who coach senior executives know that it's a horrible space. It's a really lonely space that they live in, because they're expected to be perfect all the time. They're expected to be, or they think that they need to be, perfect all the time and have all the answers. But when you look at innovation cutting across the organization, the first thing it breaks down is to say innovation to kahin se bhi aa sakta hai. So your management trainee who's 2 months into the organization could bring a fabulous idea. A worker on the shop floor could bring a fabulous idea. And as a leader, the first thing that you then need to have is high degrees of humility and openness to say, actually, ideas can come from anywhere. And I don't need to be the one with all the solutions and all the answers. What I need to do is I need to create an organization that is conducive for different people to bring their ideas to the table and to be heard. And that's my role. So my role is not as the as in a circus, it's not about being in the center stage or in a performance. I'm not the one who needs to be center stage. I actually should be backstage, or be the conductor of the orchestra who stands with his back to the audience and faces my team. It's my team that's going to deliver, and I need to create an environment that's conducive. And so I think there's that basic shift that takes place. If I was to look at it in personality language, when we start looking at leaders, then traditionally, we've always said, oh, leaders should be, they should take charge. They should be highly action-oriented. They should be very high reds. But sometimes, interestingly, the most innovative organizations don't have leaders who are like that. They have leaders who are enablers. So they have leaders with, yes, a threshold level of red so that they can get things done. But their strengths may lie somewhere else. So their greens and their yellows may be high, for example, or their blues and their greens may be high. And they're actually, kind of leveraging off the complementarity in the organization and allowing space and creating space and an environment for others to thrive. So I think the first thing is that leadership pool and how we've always looked at the leadership role in the past. The second thing is that, like I said earlier, the culture of the organization, which honestly is also created by the leaders. So what's the kind of overall culture that they build in the organization? I think that's the second crucial building block, which is very important. Is there, for example, a tolerance and almost an appreciation for mistakes? So do you say, hey, let's fail, learn from failure and move quickly? So fail fast, fail often, learn from it, move forward, versus a culture which is going to penalize people every time they make a mistake, because they're certainly then not going to put their hand up when they have a different idea, right? So some of those cultural elements around psychological safety, around risk, around how do you respond to mistakes or kind of missteps. I used to work with a really phenomenal CEO who, in fact, would say there's no such thing as a mistake. He said, in my dictionary, there's no such thing as a mistake. Everything is a learning opportunity. So some things go well, some things don't, some things go better, some things not so much, and you learn from it and you move on. What's a mistake? And I thought that was beautiful, because if you can actually think that like that, then you stop, rapping people on the knuckles when they try something different. And the third piece, I think, is enabling structures and processes, because especially for larger organizations, just having a conducive culture is not enough. If you've got to channelize ideas and channelize innovation and actually move it forward so it commercializes and brings outcomes for the organization, then you need enabling structures and processes. So I think that's the third piece. We often think innovation and creativity is counter to processes, right? If you have too many processes, it kills creativity. But you can have processes and structures that enable innovation if we are able to put them in place in the right way at the right time. So I think these three aspects, that first and foremost, the leadership kind of quality and the leadership bench that we build. The second is the cultural aspect, the culture. And the third is enabling processes and structures. And it's only when all three are aligned and are all sort of focused on creating an innovative organization by DNA is when you see an organization that's innovative. And an organization that's innovative is one where you can continuously come up with new ideas and keep moving forward. It's not a flash in the pan. एक बार 3 साल में एक phenomenal product create कर दिया और फिर you're living off those laurels. It's about the engine continuously turning out innovative thinking, and across the board, across the organization. Yeah.
Yes.
Very well called out, Diya. Something which came to my mind, because I've worked significantly on the culture and core values.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll be building on that, because culture is built with this bedrock.
Absolutely. And I think, a lot of times culture gets almost misused, right, as a term. And leaders particularly will sometimes talk about culture almost as if it's like a third leg, separate from themselves. And I always ask this question. I'm like, so what is culture? Culture is what you are creating by what you do and don't do, what you say and don't say, right? That's what builds culture over time in the organization. So it goes back to leadership. And it's not that one individual or two, but I would say, the top few sort of layers in the organization, because they role model what the organization values and kind of espouses. And that's why I think going back to, leadership and going back to their behavior and what they are role modeling and showcasing as the way of the desired way of being and doing in the organization is really what makes the difference. There's a very interesting example that comes to my mind. So apart from corporate organizations, I do a lot of work in the social space as well. And there is a particular, there's an NGO that I sit on their advisory board in Pune, and they do absolutely phenomenal work with communities and with children and women in particular. And so they have a very, very understated CEO who is always the last to speak in a meeting or in a board, in a board discussion. He's a man of a few words, but his team is phenomenally empowered. And I actually ran a workshop for the leadership team using the Lumina philosophy and the Lumina cards, etc. And it was very interesting what I found, because most corporate organizations that we look at when we look at leadership personalities and strengths and preferences, you tend to find very high action and outcome orientation. And essentially the blues and reds are what are dominant, right, in most corporate organizations, because we seem to think that that's what's going to deliver results, and so we amalgamate people with high reds and blues. And this NGO is doing absolutely phenomenal work. If you were to look at their metrics, they are like, sort of busting all their goals on every front. Very high performing organization in their space. And they are actually a leadership team of high yellows, high greens. The CEO is still red and blue. So he's a very high red and blue, but takes a back seat. And you have this wonderful leadership team, which is very, very creative, always asking why not, questioning things, turning things on their head. And he allows that to happen and enables that. And you've got this phenomenal team that's delivering, amazing results. So this traditional thing that we have of, leaders need to be very outcome focused. They will kind of tell others what to do and they will lead the way. They'll create a 5-year plan and a 1-year strategic plan, and then the organization will act on that plan. I think that whole model is broken down and is breaking down, today. Post-COVID, I think the COVID period was really a wake-up call to organizations, because for the first time, most organizations faced a problem that was unprecedented and they had no idea how to deal with it. So most leaders had never faced a situation like this in their lifetime, and they had no answers. So they had to look to others in the organization for answers. And that made them realize, I think many of them who are aware, that answers can come from anywhere. And the ones that, were able to rise above the problem and since then have actually gone from strength to strength are the ones, I think, where they've really leveraged diversity of thinking in the organization and tapped different strengths in different parts of the organization.
I mean, you talked about leadership. The core of the leadership creates the culture. Those values then go generational. We see countries still operating after 300 years of birth on the ideas of the founding fathers, what they put together. And whether it's going to be, creativity or compliance, that also is rooted over there. Look at our own country. Even in our government, the bureaucracy, the power and all is rooted in the sociological rooting, right? And it's so hard to undo.
Yeah.
So that part of culture, yes, it's very easy to sort of underestimate it. I like the way you said that the leaders tend to have the mistake of looking culture as like some outside ingredient, correct? And we know that it's not yogurt, okay? It's culture. It's what you're going to do. So absolutely. Now that was like a nice sum up of it. When you talked about it.
Culture is like the air environment around us.
Yeah.
Whether we are dealing with pollution or we are sitting in the mountains in the greenery. So I think that's how we could define the two extremes of culture.
It's a good example you've taken, because even pollution, we're saying, is someone else's problem, right?
Yeah.
Not the leader's problem. So yes. Yeah.
Seriously, PUC करना पड़ेगा.
Rahul, may I ask you to, there's so much talk about how leaders are, impacting the process of innovation. If we look at it from the lens of, personality, then what are some of the nuances that leaders can, how they can affect the process specifically?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense, I feel just combining it what Diya said, with all the good intent, even with all the like raw talent and all of that, the personality is a very hard animal to beat. And also because it is the very personality that has also given you success. If you're outwired in a certain way, whether it's in your outcome approach, whether some people are just outright competitive, some maybe like more operating from collaboration, right? Whatever is hardwired and has rewarded you, you tend to also get addicted to a little bit. I think that I find that, and it becomes harder to take an alternate approach to get answers out. So yeah, it is true. We talked about archetypes. Leaders have a tendency to amplify the archetypes they value because it's seeded in their value system, right? A competitive person, their value also starts to embody the idea of like, win-lose philosophy. Whereas for the collaborate, and that means sometimes they will end up losing talent or have short-term results, higher body counts or whatever, but they're not able to see past that. See, people don't talk personality. People justify their actions in a logical way, because if you don't justify in a logical way, you don't sound like you're in control of your life.
And I think they believe it genuinely, right? Because they think that that's the only way they know how. So
how else do you translate? I mean, you don't have an extrovert person necessarily saying that I party because I'm an extrovert. They will go beyond that. They say, I meet people. That's how I get my ideas from there. That's the way I relax. So there is almost like a justification for this invisible action from behind. And therefore, yes, there is always that risk that soon as you start to have biases and you start to nominate people who are like you in your preferred mold, in your preferred traits, and you start to identify those as a high potential, there is that risk of how you start to create the cloning effect. Now, that example that Diya took about a very, very, hot rod leader who was willing to move back. He was really doing what the role of a leader is in creating innovation as it is in collaboration. I was listening to Diya and I was thinking it's almost like, body health. I mean, if you do 4 or 5 basic things, you walk on time, you eat right, you eat on time, sleep on time, etc. It's like, 80% of the ailments, right? So the model for getting it right in the organization is in some ways very simplistic. And so I'm going to go to like one of the default things that a leader's job is to create, which leads to not just innovation, but also key ingredient for innovation, which is collaboration, right? Which is psychological safety, right? Yeah. Am I creating room for individuals to speak up in a team environment where there is no ridicule, rejection, or judgment? Am I rewarding people only for results or for also the initiative and effort? Am I blocking the truth telling in favor of the groupthink, etc.? So I think, yeah, and that's where the personality plays out. I think also a lot of leaders tend to run the risk of getting addicted to being right, because many times it's their sheer will and force has created results for them in the past, and it's hard for them now to have patience. So that example of the red hot leader who's got the blue structured approach that we talked about in Lumina parlance, you see a lot of these leaders tend to have the confidence knowing what they need to do, and because of their structured blue, they also know how to do. So now bringing people on board and having the patience to listen to new ideas which are not already in their head takes a lot of effort. So I think it starts to bring that, okay, what is the secret sauce over there? I think one of them is curiosity. Curiosity is like a big piece that if we can help our people learn that. So I don't know if I entirely talked about this idea, but yeah, I mean, it is a personality at play. It is the personality that can run amok and start to create results, surely, but restrict our options, restrict creativity, runs the obsolescence, because it doesn't, no team, no individual grows if they have openness towards feedback. And that requires what they call the growth mindset kind of thing. You can't have that fixed approach. So yeah, I mean, I think personality is a the personality of the leader is a huge factor in where the teams have the safety of experimenting with innovative ideas.
Yeah. If I may just add one thought that came to me while you were talking, Rahul, I think, for leaders to be open to ideas coming from other quarters and for there to be this sort of willingness to accept an idea different from them, their own. I mean, at the heart of it, what you need is a very secure leader, right? The minute a leader is insecure about themselves and their impact or their own position is when they start to get sort of defensive or uncomfortable with difference. And to me, I think a very crucial ingredient of building a sense of security is to build self-awareness early on. I think, unfortunately, as a society and as institutions and organizations, we focus very quickly on outcomes. We don't really help individuals understand who they are, what they're good at, and what they are maybe not so good at, or what doesn't come naturally to them, with the reassurance that it's okay because none of us are going to be good at everything.
Correct.
So that's when we start to say, okay, what I'm good at A, I'll work with somebody who's good at B, and together we are a formidable combination because then between us, we've got A and B both covered. But we then take away the sense of insecurity that the leader has to mask or hide the fact that he's not good at B. Right? And I think that starts very early on. So, you talked earlier about my desire to work with children and young adults and take this whole space there. I really genuinely believe that if we're able to crack this with people much earlier in their lives and, sort of at the start of their careers and educational journeys, then you bring up a whole generation of people who are not insecure, who know who they are as a starting point, and therefore who are willing to embrace people who are different because they see it as an opportunity. They see it as an opportunity to learn, and they see it as a powerful combination where we are putting our strengths together. So leaders who, if you study leaders who are successful and who've been the ones that are actually open and who, enable collaboration, those will be the ones who are more secure, more self-aware than others. And I think that's a very, very crucial, like a starting point, which is where I think the personality science is immensely helpful, because it helps and opens a window for people to really understand themselves better. And I think the earlier that they do it and the earlier that we enable and create that opportunity for people, I think, we are setting up then a longer runway for success and collaboration.
We are all fighting the battle between who I am and who I'm supposed to be, right? And that's why they say the journey to becoming self is a very long one. And that's why it says exhausting also. Because we've trained ourselves to be or aspire to do things that sometimes are not even natural to us. I tell you, at this age, I'm still fighting the battle of accepting the fact that I really don't have any structure or discipline. And now at this point in time, my coach counselor has threatened me with physical violence if I ever bring up the crying that, oh, I'm not structured and organized. You have not been and you never will be. Accept it. So just because we teach personality doesn't mean that we can overcome our own human limitations. But you know what? There is an alternate route always for all of us. It's just that we get too grooved into not looking beyond that. When we look at our personality science, I think we are able to actually see parts of us that we have either denied or not even thought that they belong to us. It's possible because our caregivers never acknowledged it, right? Maybe in a more sort of a structured household, which is where creativity wasn't a big piece, your creativity never got recognized, and then you kind of discounted it. So I think it's very easy. A lot of people tend to be resistant also. Even as coaches, many of us tend to sort of, belittle personality science, but they're minimizing it basis on the older tools. So they say it boxes people, it limits it. Not really. Human beings are immensely complex. And before we think of what we'll discover that is broken, what about the gifts we might discover? What about those hidden gifts over there? So, okay, as we start to come to the end of our time, Diya, I think let's bounce a little bit about what we coaches and OD professionals can do to support diversity. I mean, when we are called in to work with individuals or team, what are a couple of the things that we can bring as a contribution to our client partners?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is what you just said, right? Which is, I mean, the way I see it as a coach or as an enabler. I mean, as a coach, I see myself as an enabler. And I think that's true of OD practitioners or even HR professionals in organizations. The role really is to enable others to bring their best forward. I think that's in one line, if I was to summarize what our role is. And in order to be able to do that, one, we need to be able to help people to understand themselves without judgment. I think that's very crucial, for which we first need to also have done that work for ourselves, I think, because I know that in the last 5 years, I've probably become a significantly better coach than I was, 15 years back, even though I've been doing this for 25 years, because as I've become more self-aware and more self-accepting and self-compassionate about saying, if there's something I'm not good at, it's absolutely okay. I don't have to beat myself up over it. That also makes me, by extension, then less judgmental and more objective when I'm talking about other people or enabling other people. So I think doing the work ourselves, doing the messy work of, going within ourselves and understanding ourselves well and accepting us for who we are and loving ourselves for who we are, I think is the first stone. For me, I think that's probably in my lifetime being the biggest learning. The second is to understand the science of of human behavior, to understand the science of personality, because those are tools that we have in our arsenal to be able to help others to understand themselves and, really recognize their own maybe untapped strengths, like you said, potential that has, gone unnoticed so far, and equally also recognize what we may not be so good at, and learn to be comfortable with that. But for that, it can't just be a art-based conversation, right? It can't just be intuition. I think we have the privilege today of a lot of fabulous science and work that's happening, on the behavioral sciences space, and we should therefore keep abreast with that and leverage that to enable our clients and our employees and organizations. So I think that's the second piece. I think the third piece is that apart from the coaches that we work with or employees that we work with, we often have the ear of the leaders in the organization, because they see us as objective, either third party outside consultants, or within the organization. I always say, as a CHRO, one of your biggest roles is to actually call out what's not okay to the CEO. You need to be the conscience keeper of the organization. So if we're seeing lack of psychological safety, if we're seeing lack of inclusion, I think it's a moral responsibility to be calling that out in a constructive way, so that that's something that can be addressed and fixed, because without that, there's going to be none of this growth and development and diversity that we're talking about. So the self work, understanding behavioral science, using that to genuinely with the best intent enable and help others to understand themselves, whether it's our coaches or whether it's employees in the organizations we work with, and being the voice of the right and being the conscience keeper in the organization to ensure that leaders are playing their role that we just talked about before this, and calling it out when that's not happening, I think is the third very crucial role that we have. And if we can do these three things, I think there's immense power that as coaches and OD professionals that we hold, and I use the word power in a very positive sense, to be able to make a difference, to actually make a difference, and change things around us.
Correct. So I agree with you. I mean, I think that science part is important. I think we're delusional to believe that we know all we know for ourselves, and we can leverage that science of personality, and especially today, modern tools like Lumina and all, steeped in positive psychology, make them more acceptable. So if we can help a person know themselves, accept themselves, and also trust themselves, I think they can start a big cascading effect.
Well said.
I want to pause over here, and then Sonam, I mean, do you have any questions? Because I know we almost had time, but it'll be good to take a couple of questions if we can.
In the flow of the conversation, I think it's relevant to pick up Nalina's question here. That does Lumina Spark pick up psychological safety issues? Can we use Lumina Spark to, maybe contribute in some way that how we can enhance psychological safety within an organization?
Well, I mean, in the sense, Lumina gives us the measures. It also has a section on psychological diversity to understand what is it like to work with people like you and your mirror cells, right? So your mirror cells and your mirror opposites. And I think that's where the understanding begins. Also, Lumina allows us to contrast a group personality by creating team profiles. So you can already see what is the diversity over there. So psychological, I mean, as it's a measure, right? It's the blood works. Then the work of the doctor begins. Then we come in to create that, help people learn the idea of psychological safety. It can show you by those evaluation and the team scores whether psychological safety could be at risk. That it does. It also shows to that if there's a contrast between a leader's behavior and overextension than the rest of the team, that's again a Fisher code. So yeah, it gives you the measures, definitely, but it doesn't sort of define the actions to be taken, because that's the job of the tool.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with what you say, Rahul. One, I think from the leader's own personality, I think it gives you sort of lead indicators where, like you said, of where there is a risk of a leader creating lack of psychological safety. I think that's one. And the other is certainly, I think, the team profile. It's very, very powerful when you're working with, an organization. If you do have an opportunity to use the team profile, for the top leadership team, I think the difference between their, inherent strengths and how things are playing out in their behavior, I think those two, the gap between those certainly points to occasions of or lack of psychological safety. It gives you, I would say, warning signals, and then the conversations need to delve deeper into that and understand it. I've definitely seen it as a very very good sort of a what should I say, like an indicator, and then of course go beyond the.
Yeah, thanks, Divya. That was very informative. On that part of it, also then tantamounts that the self-awareness part in the individual is much deeper, or maybe they have to cultivate that.
Yeah, I think it's a crucial aspect, and if we can help with that, and which is where the behavioral science, I think, has a is a very useful input to give. I think to me what's interesting is tools like Lumina, because they're self-administered. It isn't like with 360 feedback, I think is great as well. As I very often use 360 feedback and Lumina together, hand in hand.
Oh, nice.
Because it gives the leader a mirror. One is something that they've taken themselves and is the scientific aspect. The other is feedback, which tells them, how others are experiencing and viewing them. And I think together they're very powerful. But just the high validity, and reliability of the Lumina outcomes. I mean, in my experience, 8 out of 10 times, people look at it and they say, oh, it's figured out exactly who I am, right? And the fact that they have actually answered the questionnaire, they can't dish it, right? So they can't say, oh, I don't agree with this, because they also know that it's based on their own responses. And then you put it together with 360 feedback, I think it provides fabulous fodder for self-awareness. By itself, it's not equal to self-awareness, because the leader has to be able to be willing to work with it. But I think that's where we come in, is to, in a non-judgmental way, help the individual through that journey. So that they don't, that's the point, that if they start to feel insecure and feel exposed, then it becomes a problem. And if we're able to handhold them through it in a way where they really see that it's going to help them, I think it's very powerful.
Yeah. And hence the onus on the facilitator as well to create that safe space.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
We have another question.
Sorry, I'm just going to also, because we talked about, we've just talked about strength. Rahul made a very valid point right now, saying we very quickly jump to looking at our gap areas. But, can we first look at our strengths, and a lot of times even untapped strengths that we haven't realized exist. I'm just going to take the liberty to share an article in the chat box, which is something that, I worked on with a bunch of other people, which I think very beautifully goes to the heart of this conversation and some of the things we've been talking about. So I'm just going to share it as reading material in the chat box.
Is that the article that you wrote?
Yes.
So that Sonam is sending to everybody.
Okay, perfect. She has that?
She has that.
All right.
So also some of the people would have requested who couldn't make it last minute. So
okay, great. Perfect.
I think we are on time, Sonam, so I'll give it back to you.
I have two more questions.
Okay.
First question is from Sandeep. That cloning impact we talked about, it could work either way. We get very few instances of red wired with equal component of blue. So how, as coaches, we can help the leaders to uncover themselves even if they are not curious? Sandeep,
I'm not sure if I fully got that, but
yeah, I think I'm also a little foxed.
I mean, my point is, I also believe that we just don't have to go with the syringe full of innovation everywhere. There are periods where that when you are dealing with things, it's not like you got to be constantly the innovative mode. And there's also, remember, in the workplace, especially large part of the corporate workplace and all of that, you do see the ascendancy of the red and blue a lot more, because they're executing and they're creating structures. So,
and that's what we reward, right? All our structures reward that behavior. So it does get, I think.
Yeah, because you can't be having creativity at all times, at all levels. And that also creates chaos. I mean, we see innovation, it is an organic process. It's always taking place. It's Darwinian. But then there is also required innovation, which is reactive. I mean, look at right now, we have to react all the time. You don't get your tech effort right in the first time, then you're already behind, right? We've gone so fast. And then there, of course, the proactive one, translation of an idea when their moment has come. So I think innovation is not something that we need to kind of measure, judge, and reject people for outright. A large part of it is just execution of the ideas.
But if I may just say, I mean, I don't know, Sandeep, what you meant when you said that the cloning effect can cut both ways. I mean, my personal point of view and experience has been that cloning is never helpful in any situation. And diversity of thinking is always helpful in every situation. The only exception that I would say is when there is a crisis, when there is a genuine emergency situation, I mean, where lives are at stake, right? So if I'm talking about an army general, in the field, where in a war situation, you don't want creative thinking at that point, and you don't want innovation, because speed of action and response is critical. And there is a sort of laid down process in order to ensure safety of lives. But honestly, even in that, I mean, there are, if you go back in history, there are innumerable stories of that one soldier who took a risk and did something which was against protocol, and in that situation it actually saved lives, or it proved to be the right thing to do. So there are also those exceptions, but I would say that, I mean, probably emergency like situations where people's lives are at stakes are the only place where I think cloning is, sometimes, or just let's say an SOP and following it to the T is more important. But I haven't yet come across other situations where diversity of thinking and innovation is unhelpful, and that sort of compliance to just a one way of doing and thinking is more helpful. I mean, I'm happy to be corrected if somebody has a different point of view, but that's been my personal experience, at least.
Sandeep, I hope that answers the question, or you're welcome to share your perspective.
Okay. Sonam, I've got my eye on the clock as well.
Yes. But just one last question is there. Any suggestions on, this is from Ramona, any suggestions on working around the status quo, as often it is not possible to directly challenge it?
We've been in situations, I mean, I have been, when HR has come with a issue about stagnancy or a new leader in the system and team not being able to call out, or that, from a very empowered leader has been replaced by a very controlling leader, you can't call it out. How do you go about it? I mean, see, for me, as an outside consultant, I have the liberty to call things out. Here for me, and again, as I say it, I find that like I'm going back to the same song each time. A personality analysis allows me to put numbers on the board. Okay. And I can start to talk about what personality traits are playing out. And if the leader is going to call out on other people for their personality and its impact, it doesn't spare his either. So for me, that has worked for me in the past, to call out things without quite calling them out. So that what is the impact, what is likely to happen when we do the team profile, we see the scores, we call it out. We said, look, this is where things are stuck. Now, I'm assuming Ramona is talking a little bit about status quo coming from one place because you can't call it out. I'm not sure if it's a finger pointed at the leader. But Diya, how do you pick that question?
I mean, I think, so one is, like you said rightly, if you're outside the organization, then your prerogative and privilege is different versus if you're inside the organization. As an outsider, actually, you have a lot more luxury of being able to call out status quo and say, there's a different way of looking at this. Unfortunately, however, I will also say that I see colleagues around us who are external, and I think we don't do that enough. So even though we have the privilege to be able to do that, very often, because we are also, we also sometimes fall into this trap of telling the leader what he wants to hear or what she wants to hear, because we think it will give us more business over a period of time, to put it very bluntly, right? So he likes me and I will keep agreeing with him and say what he wants to hear. But I think our role as outsiders is to show the mirror and to call out the different point of view. And my experience has been that sometimes in the short term, it means that a leader may not want to work with you, but in the long run, it brings you tremendous credibility in the market and from your clients. So play the long-term game, I would say, and become somebody who is a voice of reason and who is a thought leader, who does bring a different point of view as the outsider. As an insider, sometimes it's not as easy. It is hard. I think there I will differentiate between what you're saying and how you're saying it, to put it very simply. The message that you want to carry, what you're saying, which is maybe a different way of doing something, may not be received well because it's going against the status quo. And that is where how you say it becomes really crucial. So I think just, enhancing our own influencing skills to know how to say things and how to kind of, massage things into an organization and navigate organizational hierarchy and structures is immensely helpful. I'm not good at it, I have to admit. So that's why I'm also happier on the outside. But I have a lot of colleagues who are very good at this. I work with people who I find are fabulous at knowing how to be able to influence within an organization for the right things, and have very tough conversations and be able to drive change without sort of harming themselves or others. So doing it in a very strategic, very tactful way. Sometimes it's direct influencing, sometimes you have to go through. So you need to understand power structures in the organization. You need to build allies and work through others, not just do it the direct way. But it's a lifetime of learning.
Yes.
I don't know if I've
And it's
answered the
not like a
question.
one-off.
Yeah,
But it's not a
said.
one-off intervention. That's the one thing I
Yeah,
always say to
yeah.
people, that this is not something that's taken rot for so long. You have to. Oftentimes the challenge is when people say come like a one-off and do a plug-off. You're not fixing an MCB board, So okay, Sonam, I'm mindful of the time because I see like people are beginning to drop off. So I think we should start to call it a wrap. Okay.
Thank you, my panelists, for
Very
such an
active.
insightful and fun conversation. I hope we really enjoyed, we all enjoyed the conversation, and we are taking away so much from this. And thank you all for attending, for taking out the time today to join us. And I would like to personally invite all of you for our upcoming program, which is being led by our global CEO and founder, Dr. 𝗜𝗺𝗃𝗃𝗃. It's a 3-city tour on personality and innovation, and I'm dropping the details in the chat box. So you're welcome to register, or you can also contact the team for more information. Thank you so much. And thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Diya, for sharing so many insights and so much from your experience, and had a lovely time listening to the both of you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonam, for organizing this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Very insightful. Thank you. And I'll circle back to you again, Rahul. Yeah, to build on what's been discussed.